June 19, 1944, 18,000 feet above the Philippine Sea. Lieutenant James "Brick" Bradford felt the stick vibrate in his gloved hands as his F-SIF Hellcat carved through humid tropical air. Sweat pooled in his flight suit despite the altitude chill. Through the oil-streaked canopy, the Pacific stretched endlessly below, a wrinkled sheet of blue, gray steel catching the late afternoon sun. His radio crackled with the controlled chaos of what the brass would later call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. But right now, Brick's world had narrowed to the gun sight dancing before his eyes, and the dark shape growing larger in his windscreen. Tally-ho, 2 bogeys, 11 o'clock level. His wingman's voice cut through the static. Brick saw them. 2 medium bombers in loose formation, their twin-engine silhouettes unmistakable even at 3 miles. Mitsubishi G4M bombers, what intelligence called Type 1 attack bombers, but what every American pilot in the Pacific knew as Betties. Long, sleek fuselages, wings that seemed too graceful for their purpose. They were angling toward the American carrier group, likely loaded with torpedoes or bombs meant for the flat top steaming below. He pushed the throttle forward. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 roared, pressing him back into his seat. The Hellcat accelerated, like a heavyweight boxer throwing a haymaker. Nothing elegant about it, just raw, overwhelming power. American engineering versus Japanese. The distance closed 2,000 yards, 500, 1,000. The Betty crews saw them coming. The lead bomber's dorsal turret swiveled, its 20mm cannon seeking angles. Tracers asked out, bright orange beads strung on invisible wire, passing lazily overhead before whipping past at closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. Brick jinked right, then back left. The second Betty broke formation, banking hard, its pilot trying for cloud cover that didn't exist. "I'll take the brake," Brick called. "You stay high." "Roger that." Brick rolled inverted and pulled, the G-forces crushing him downward as the horizon spun. Blood drained from his head, his vision tunneled. Then he was right side up again, 500 feet below his target, climbing hard into the Betty's blind spot beneath its belly. This was textbook. Come up from below where they couldn't see you, get close enough that you couldn't miss, and pour fire into the engines and cockpit. At 300 yards, he could see every detail, the bomber's dark green camouflage, the red Hinamaru circles on its wings, even the individual panels of its aluminum skin. Oil stains streaked back from the engine cowlings. The bomb bay doors were closed. This one was carrying a torpedo, slung like a shark beneath its belly. 200 yards. Brick's thumb found the trigger on his stick. The gun sight's illuminated reticle steadied on the bomber's starboard engine. He squeezed. 6 Browning M2 machine guns erupted. The Hellcat shuddered as though seized by a violent cough. 50 caliber rounds, each as long as a man's hand, each capable of punching through engine blocks, streamed forward at 800 rounds per minute. Brick could see his tracers walking across the Betty's wing route, sparking against metal. He adjusted slightly, letting the stream chew into the fuselage just behind the cockpit, then tracking forward too. The Betty vanished, not exploded, not caught fire, vanished in a white-orange fireball so violent, so instantaneous, that Brick's brain couldn't process the transition. 1 millisecond a bomber. The next, an expanding sphere of flame and smoke. The shockwave hit his Hellcat like a physical wall. The fighter tumbled, throwing Brick against his harness straps hard enough to bruise ribs. Fragments of burning aluminum whistled past, one punching a hole through his port wing with a sound like a hammer on sheet metal. He fought the stick, muscles screaming, finally bringing the Hellcat level at 16,000 feet. His breath came in ragged gasps. His ears rang despite the leather flying helmet. Where the Betty had been, there was only a spreading cloud of black smoke and a rain of debris tumbling toward the ocean. No parachutes, no survivors, just gone. "Holy Christ, Brick! What the hell did you hit?" His wingman's voice carried an edge of disbelief. Brick stared at the dissipating smoke. He'd been flying combat for 8 months. He'd shot down 3 Japanese aircraft, seen 24 more go down around him. Planes caught fire. They broke apart. They trailed smoke and limped home or ditched in the ocean. But they didn't just explode like that, not from a single burst. "I don't know," he said quietly. his voice almost lost in the radio static. I don't know. 2 hours later, Brick's Hellcat caught the number 3 wire on USS Lexington's flight deck. The arresting cable sang with tension as it jerked 12,000 pounds of aircraft from 90 miles per hour to zero in less than 300 feet. His body slammed forward against the harness, then back. The usual carrier landing. Controlled violence that never got comfortable. He taxied clear as deck crews in colored jerseys swarmed around him, their hand signals guiding him toward the parking area. The barrier dropped behind him. Another Hellcat dropped onto the deck, its tailhook screaming against steel. The dance continued. Land, taxi, clear, repeat, until all of Air Group 16 was back aboard. All except 3 aircraft that wouldn't be coming home. Brick killed the engine. In the sudden quiet, his ears still rang from hours of radial engine thunder. His hands trembled slightly as he unstrapped. Adrenaline debt coming due. The canopy slid back, and Pacific humidity hit him like a wet towel. He pulled off his leather helmet, ran fingers through sweat-soaked hair. Lieutenant Bradford, a young ensign, stood on the wing, barely old enough to shave. Air Intelligence wants you in the ready room ASAP. The SAG wants debrief while it's fresh. Brick nodded, too tired to speak. His legs wobbled as he climbed down, his flight suit dark with sweat, despite the wind whipping across the deck. Around him, other pilots were emerging from their cockpits, some animated, hands gesturing dogfight maneuvers, others silent and pale, processing what they'd seen. The ready room smelled of coffee, cigarette smoke, and too many men in too small a space. Brick grabbed a cup, black, bitter, and probably brewed 6 hours ago, and found a seat among the folding chairs facing the front bulkhead. Other pilots from VF-16 filtered in, their conversations creating a low rumble punctuated by nervous laughter. Commander Paul Buey, the Air Group commander, stood at the front beside a Navy intelligence officer Brick didn't recognize. A lieutenant commander with wire, rim glasses, and the pale skin of someone who rarely saw sunlight. A map of the Philippine Sea covered the bulkhead behind them, red and blue markers indicating the day's action. Gentlemen, Buey's voice cut through the chatter. The room settled. Hell of a day. Intelligence says we splashed over 300 of their aircraft. 300. Against 40, some of ours. That's not a battle. That's a massacre. He paused, his jaw working. But something strange is showing up in multiple after-action reports, and I need to understand it. The intelligence officer stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. Lieutenant Commander Richard Hayes, Fleet Intelligence. I need to ask about the Betty bombers specifically. How many of you engaged G4M targets today? A dozen hands went up, including Brick's. Hayes nodded, making a note on his clipboard. And how many of you witnessed catastrophic explosions? Not fires, not crashes, but immediate detonation from what you assessed as hits to the fuselage or wings. Brick's hand stayed up, so did 9 others. Hayes's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his glasses. Lieutenant Bradford, your report mentions a Betty exploding from a single burst. Walk me through it. Brick set down his coffee cup. I came up from their 6 o'clock low standard approach, opened fire at maybe 200 yards, 50. Carls walked from the starboard engine across the wing route into the fuselage, maybe 1-2 seconds of fire. 300 rounds, tops. He paused, seeing it again in his mind. It didn't burn. It didn't break up. It just detonated, like I'd hit an ammunition ship. The shockwave damn near flipped me. Were you carrying incendiary rounds? Standard API load, sir. Armor-piercing incendiary. Same as always. Hayes made another note. Lieutenant Morrison, your report is similar. A pilot 3 rows back stood, tall, red-haired, with a Carolina drawl. Yes, sir. I hit one head-on, convergence at 400 yards. Saw my rounds hit the nose and cockpit area. The whole forward fuselage erupted like a Roman candle. I flew through the debris field, got hydraulic fluid and God knows what else all over my windscreen. Lieutenant Chen, a stocky pilot with a New York accent. Same deal, Commander. I thought maybe I'd hit their bomb load, but the fireball started in the wing, not the belly. I've hit Bettys before, back in 43 over a ball. They burned, sure, but they didn't blow up like this. Something's different. Hayes looked at his clipboard. then back at the assembled pilots. The room had gone completely silent. Even the carrier's ambient noise, the ventilation hum, the distant clang of machinery, the ever-present vibration of the ship's engines seemed to fade. Gentlemen, this isn't the first time we've seen this. Reports from the Solomons, from Rabaul, from New Guinea, all describe similar incident. Betty bombers exploding from hits that would cripple or damage American aircraft, but not destroy them outright. He removed his glasses, cleaned them with a handkerchief. We're investigating the possibility that Japanese fuel systems lack the protection measures we consider standard. You mean self-sealing tanks? Someone asked. Among other things. But I need your gun camera footage and detailed reports. Times, altitudes, attack angles, where you hit them, what happened. Every detail matters. Brick leaned back in his chair, the metal frame creaking. He thought about that moment of transformation. Bomber to fireball in the space between heartbeats. He thought about the Japanese crew pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, gunners. Men like him, doing their jobs, flying in a bomb waiting for a spark. June 21, 1944, Intelligence Section, USS Lexington. The film projector clattered in the darkened compartment, its beam cutting through cigarette smoke to splash grainy black and white imagery onto the white, painted bulkhead. Lieutenant Commander Hayes sat forward in his chair, eyes fixed on the screen, while his hand worked the projector's advanced knob frame by frame. Beside him, Commander WW2 watched in silence. Behind them, 3 other intelligence officers from the task force had crowded into the small space, summoned by Hayes's urgent request. Here, Hayes said, freezing the frame. Watch the wing. He released the knob. The footage lurched forward in slow motion, gun camera film from Lieutenant Morrison's Hellcat. The image showed a Betty bomber filling the frame, growing larger as Morrison closed from ahead and above. Tracer rounds walked across the aircraft's nose, bright flashes against dark metal. Then the rounds tracked into the wing root and, the Betty's entire port wing erupted in flame. Not from the engine, not from the fuel tank's expected location. The entire wing, from root to mid-span, became a sheet of fire in a single frame. 3 frames later, the explosion had consumed the fuselage. 5 frames after that, only burning debris remained. Dear God, one of the officers muttered. Hayes rewound, played it again, then again. Notice the explosion propagates from the wing root outward and into the fuselage simultaneously. That's not a single fuel cell rupturing. That's multiple compartments igniting at once. He switched off the projector. Someone turned on the overhead lights. Hayes pulled a folder from his briefcase, thick with papers, photographs, and technical diagrams, and spread several photographs across the table. They showed Betty bomber wreckage, twisted metal, burned framework, sections of wing and fuselage recovered from various Pacific battle sites over the past 18 months. We've been collecting these since mid-42, Hayes said. Guadalcanal, New Guinea, the Solomons. Initial analysis focused on engines, weapons, radio equipment, anything useful for tactical intelligence. He tapped one photograph showing a section of wing structure. The metal peeled back like a tin can. But last month, when we started correlating pilot reports of catastrophic explosions with structural analysis, a pattern emerged. He pulled out a technical drawing, obviously Japanese, captured or recovered, with neat engineering annotations in kanji and dimensional measurements. This came from a Betty that ditched relatively intact off Saipan 2 weeks ago. One of our CB salvage teams pulled it up before it sank completely. The flight engineer's manual was still in the cockpit. Commander WW2 leaned forward, and Hayes traced his finger along the drawing's wing cross section. American aircraft, B-17s, B-24s, even our fighters, have self-sealing fuel tanks, rubber bladders with multiple layers. When punctured, the material swells on contact with fuel, sealing the hole. Japanese designers know this technology exists. The Germans use it. The British use it. We found evidence in captured documents that Mitsubishi engineers proposed it for the G4M, but WW2 prompted. But the G4M was designed to a specific mission requirement, 2,000-mile range. That's Tokyo to the Marianas. That's Rabaul to Guadalcanal. That's island bases to American carrier groups operating 1,000 miles at sea. Hayes pulled out another diagram, this one showing the entire aircraft in cross-section. To achieve that range with the engines available in 1940, Mitsubishi made a choice. He pointed to the wings. They turned the wings into fuel tanks, not tanks in the wings. The wings are the tanks. Look here, the wing structure itself forms the tank walls. No rubber bladders, no self-sealing materials, no protection except thin aluminum skin and the structural spars. The room had gone silent except for the carrier's ambient noise and the ventilation system's hum. How much fuel? Buie asked quietly. Total capacity 260 gallons. For comparison, a B-17 carries 520 gallons, but in protected cells within the wing structure, each isolated from the others. Hayes's finger traced the Betty's wing outline. The G4M's entire wing interior, from root to near the tip, both wings, is filled with aviation fuel. When you hit it, you're not puncturing a tank. You're puncturing a fuel reservoir that runs nearly the entire wingspan. And because there's no self-sealing capability, the fuel aerosolizes, mixes with air, and he didn't need to finish. Every man in the room understood what happened when vaporized aviation fuel met tracer rounds, burning at 2,000 degrees. Jesus Christ, someone whispered. They're flying gas tanks with wings, Hayes confirmed, and it gets worse. The fuselage has additional unprotected tanks here and here. He pointed to locations along the bomber's body to save weight. Because self-sealing materials add hundreds of pounds, they eliminated protection entirely. No armor for the crew, no armored glass, minimal defensive armament, everything sacrificed for range. Buie sat back, his face pale in the harsh overhead lighting. How many Bettys are in their inventory? Intelligence estimates suggest they've produced over 400 units since 1940. It's their primary land-based naval bomber. They have nothing else with comparable range. And every crew knows they're flying a death trap. Hayes nodded slowly. Captured aircrew interrogations confirm they're aware. They call it hamaki, cigar, because of how it burns when hit. But their navy keeps flying them because there's no alternative. Without the Betty, they can't reach our carriers from their island bases. Without the range, they can't defend their perimeter. Commander Buie stood, walked to the bulkhead, stared at the technical drawings without really seeing them. When he spoke, his voice carried an emotion Brick would have recognized, the same hollow feeling that came after watching men die in flames, knowing it would happen again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. So every Betty we encounter is essentially a flying bomb. One lucky hit, and the whole crew dies. Yes, sir, Hayes said, and they keep flying them anyway. June 24, 1944, USS Lexington Ready Room. The briefing board showed a simple tactical diagram that would have been unremarkable 3 days earlier. Now, looking at the chalk marks indicating approach vectors and firing solutions, Brick Bradford understood he was seeing something darker, a blueprint for systematic slaughter. Primary targets remain the Japanese carrier groups, Commander Buie said, pointer tapping the map. But intelligence has updated our engagement protocols for Betty bombers. He nodded to Lieutenant Commander Hayes, who'd become a fixture in their ready room briefings. Hayes stepped forward, adding his own diagram to the board, a top-down silhouette of a G4M with shaded areas marked in red. Based on structural analysis and combat footage review, these areas represent optimal hit zones for catastrophic kills. Wing roots here and here, mid-fuselage here, the area directly aft of the cockpit. Brick felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't targeting enemy aircraft. This was targeting men who had no chance. A short burst, 1 to 2 seconds, into these zones should be sufficient. Hayes continued, his voice clinical, detached. The fuel vapor ignition will do the rest. You'll conserve ammunition and neutralize the threat before they can reach the task force. Lieutenant Morrison raised his hand. Commander, are we confirming that every Betty has this vulnerability? No modifications, no field upgrades to protected tanks. Correct. We've examined wreckage from aircraft manufactured as recently as April 1944. No changes to the fuel system design. They can't modify them without completely redesigning the wing structure, which would require retooling their entire production line. Hayes paused. They're committed to this design, Because they have no choice. The ready room remained quiet. 22 pilots absorbed the implications. Brick glanced around at faces he'd flown with for 8 months. Men who'd celebrated kills with whiskey and backslapping, who kept score with rising sun flags painted under their cockpit canopies. Now they looked like soldiers who'd been ordered to shoot prisoners. "Sir," Brick heard himself say, "they know they're flying coffins, and they still come at us." Hayes met his eyes. Interrogation of captured Betty crew from last month's raids confirms they're fully aware. One flight engineer, shot down near Guam, told us, through interpreters, that crews pray before every mission, not the general prayers. Specific prayers for a quick death if they're hit. The silence deepened. They know one tracer round in the wrong place means the whole crew burns. No time to bail out. The aircraft disintegrates too fast. Hayes removed his glasses, cleaned them. A gesture Brick had learned meant the intelligence officer was about to deliver something particularly grim. And yet, Japanese naval aviation continues launching Betty squadrons against our task forces. Yesterday's reconnaissance suggests another strike forming up at Yup Island. Estimated strength, 18 to 24 Bettys. Commander Bew took over. "We'll intercept before they reach the carriers. Standard Cape procedures. You have your assignments." Wheels up at Euro 600. He glanced at Hayes, then back at his pilots. "I know this feels wrong, but remember what those bombers carry. Torpedoes that can sink a carrier. Bombs that can kill hundreds of our sailors. Every Betty that gets through is American lives lost." "Understood." A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the ready room. "Good. Get some sleep." Dismissed. June 25, 1944, 14,000 feet above the Philippine Sea. The Japanese formation appeared on the horizon at 14:37 hours, dark specks against towering cumulus clouds, holding steady course toward the American Task Force 120 miles to the east. Brick counted 16 Bettys in loose sections of 3 and 4, with a handful of Zero fighters weaving above them in escort. Tally multiple bandits. 12 o'clock level, the chap leader called. Hellcats engage the Zeros. Corsairs, you're on the bombers. Brick's division, 4 F4U Corsairs from VF-17, peeled away from the main fighter group, diving to build speed. The other 3 pilots flew tight, Morrison on his wing, Chen, and a new kid named Patterson in the second element. The Corsairs' inverted gull wings caught sunlight as they dropped through 12,000 feet, engine noise building to a banshee howl. The Zeros saw them coming, breaking away from the bombers to intercept. Above and behind, the Hellcats moved to engage. Within seconds, the orderly formations dissolved into a swirling furball of aircraft, tracer fire drawing orange lines across the sky. But Brick's division had already punched through. The Bettys lay ahead, maintaining formation, bomb bay doors still closed, disciplined, professional, flying toward their targets, knowing that American fighters had broken through, knowing what came next, and still holding course. Brick armed his guns, line abreast, single pass, break high, pick your targets. The range closed, 1,000 yards, 800. He could see the lead Betty's gunners tracking him, their cannons traversing. Tracer fire reached out, falling short, 600 yards. The bombers held formation. No evasive action, no breaking off. They were committed to the attack run, and nothing would divert them. 500 yards. Brick selected the second aircraft in the lead section, steadied his gun sight on the bomber's nose, then dropped the Pipper to the wing root. The red, shaded kill zone from Hayes's diagram. His thumb found the trigger. The Corsair's 650 calibers erupted, the familiar hammer, blow vibration running through the airframe. Tracers asked forward, seeming to float lazily before they struck. He saw impacts spark across the Betty's port wing route. He held the trigger for 2 seconds, exactly as brief, then released and broke hard left. The Betty exploded, even expecting it, even having seen it before. The violence of it shocked him. The bomber didn't burn or break apart. It ceased to exist as an aircraft and became an expanding ball of orange flame and black smoke. The concussion wave rippled outward. The Betty flying off its port wing staggered in the blast, its own wing catching fire from burning fuel spray. That aircraft exploded 4 seconds later. To his right, Morrison's target detonated, then Chen's, then Patterson's, the new kid's first kill, and it had taken him 3 seconds of trigger time. 4 Bettys gone in perhaps 10 seconds of combat. The remaining bombers held formation. They didn't break. They didn't scatter. They continued toward the American carriers, closing ranks to fill the gaps left by their dead, while above them their Zero escorts fought and died against superior numbers, and around them the sky filled with tracers and flame and falling debris. Brick hauled the Corsair around for another pass, his hands mechanical on the stick and throttle, his mind somewhere else, watching those remaining bombers hold course with the certain knowledge that more American fighters were coming, that every second of flight brought them closer to the same instantaneous death that had claimed their squadron mates. Jesus, Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. They're not even trying to evade. They can't, Chen responded, his voice flat. They abort the run. They've failed. They evade. They break formation and die alone. Only chance is to press through, hope enough survive to get their torpedoes off. Brick rolled inverted, pulled, came around for his second pass. More Corsairs were arriving. The 2nd Division, fresh and fully armed. The Bettys didn't stand a chance. They had to know it. They kept coming anyway. He lined up another bomber, found the wing root in his gun sight, and squeezed the trigger. His 50, Cal spoke again. Tracers walked into the wing. The bomber exploded, vanished, became smoke and memory. No parachutes. There were never parachutes. The crews died too fast to jump, burned too quickly to scream, became statistics in someone's after-action report. And tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that, more Bettys would come, because Japan had built them by the thousands, because their bases couldn't reach American carriers with any other aircraft, because turning back meant certain defeat, and pressing forward meant only probable death. Brick's radio filled with calls. Splash 1 Betty. Got him. Wing root shot. 3 down. Section 4. The slaughter continued until no bombers remained. July 2nd, 1944. USS Lexington Officers' Wardroom. Brick Bradford sat alone at a corner table, nursing lukewarm coffee and staring at a weak, old copy of Stars and Stripes without reading it. Around him, the wardroom buzzed with the usual evening activity. Officers finishing dinner, playing cards, writing letters home. The normalcy felt obscene. In 9 days of operations since the Philippine Sea battle, he'd shot down 11 aircraft. 7 of them were Bettys. 7 explosions. 7 crews. Perhaps 50 men, dead in fireballs so bright they left after images burned into his retinas. He'd become efficient at it. Wing root shots. 2. Second burst. Break away before the blast wave hit. A hunter killing tethered prey. Lieutenant Commander Hayes slid into the seat across from him, carrying his own coffee and a manila folder that had become a constant accessory. The intelligence officer looked older than he had 2 weeks ago. New lines around his eyes, a tightness in his jaw. Mind company? Hayes asked. Brick gestured at the empty chair. It's your ship too. They sat in silence for a moment. The ventilation system hummed. Someone laughed at a nearby table, a sound that seemed to come from another world. Final casualty analysis came through from CINCPAC. Hayes said quietly, opening his folder. Battle of Philippine Sea, June 19th and 20th. Japanese losses 3 carriers, 476 aircraft confirmed destroyed. American losses 123 aircraft, primarily to fuel exhaustion, during the return flight from the long-range strike. He paused. Of those 476 Japanese aircraft, 216 were G4M Betty bombers. Brick said nothing. Fleet wide gun camera analysis indicates that approximately 180 of those Bettys, 83%, were catastrophic kills. Instantaneous fuel vapor explosion. Estimated survival rate of crew members from those 180 aircraft, 0. Hayes closed the folder. That's roughly first 260 men who died because their aircraft turned into flying bombs when hit. Why are you telling me this? Brick's voice came out harsher than intended. Because you asked the question in the ready room 3 days ago. You asked why they keep flying these aircraft when they know. Hayes took a long drink of coffee. I've been trying to answer it. Not the tactical answer. That's easy. They have no alternative bomber with the range. But the human answer. Why do crews keep manning aircraft that are fundamentally death-trapped? Brick looked up. Hayes had taken off his glasses, was cleaning them again, but this time his hands shook slightly. I've read the interrogation reports. Every captured Betty crewman, every survivor we've pulled from the water. And there's a pattern. Hayes put his glasses back on. They know. Every single one knows about the fuel tanks, the lack of protection, the casualty rates. But they fly anyway because their alternative is worse. What's worse than burning alive at 14,000 feet, failing their brothers, abandoning their duty, letting American carriers operate freely while their own fleet dies without support? Hayes leaned forward. One flight engineer, 21 years old, badly burned, both legs broken from a water landing, told his interrogator that he'd flown 47 missions in Betty's. 47. He'd seen his entire original crew die, one by one, replaced with new men who died in turn. And when I asked the translator why this kid kept flying, you know what he said? Brick waited, he said, because the carriers must be stopped, and we are the only ones who can reach them. That simple. That absolute. Hayes sat back. They're not fanatics, Bradford. They're men trapped in an impossible situation, flying impossible missions in aircraft their own designers knew were coffins. And they do it anyway, because the strategic calculus demands it. From across the wardroom, laughter erupted again. Someone had won a card game. We've killed 100 Betty bombers since 1942, Hayes continued. Intelligence estimates Mitsubishi has produced 400 total. They're still making them, still sending them out, because what else can they do? Redesign the aircraft. That's 18 months of retooling while they lose the Pacific. Ground the fleet. That's surrender. So they keep producing flying gas tanks and keep finding crews willing to fly them. And we keep shooting them down. And everyone involved knows exactly how it ends. Brick thought about the Betty he'd killed that morning. He'd come up from below, put a 3-second burst into the port wing route, and watched it explode. Standard procedure now. Routine. The bomber hadn't even maneuvered, just held course until it became fire. He'd seen the dorsal gunner, just for an instant before the explosion, still at his station, still firing, still doing his duty in a flying coffin. There was a gunner, Brick said quietly. This morning, top turret, he was still shooting when I hit the wing. Probably didn't even know I was there until the tracers hit. He died doing his job. They all do, Hayes said. That's the thing, isn't it? We're not fighting cowards or fools. We're fighting men every bit as brave, as professional, as dedicated as we are. They're just doing it in aircraft that kill them as efficiently as we do. Will they stop producing them? The Bettys. Hayes shook his head. Latest intelligence says Mitsubishi is increasing production. They've lost so many they need to replace them faster. And crews keep volunteering because he trailed off. Because someone has to. Brick finished. Because someone has to. They sat in silence while the wardroom carried on around them. The war's daily rhythm uninterrupted by philosophical questions or moral weight. Tomorrow there would be more missions. More Bettys would come. More explosions would bloom against the Pacific sky. More crews would die in aircraft that transformed their courage into fuel for their own pyres. Brick thought about the strategic calculus Hayes mentioned. Every Betty they shot down was one less torpedo threat to the carriers, one less bomb load that might kill dozens of American sailors. The mathematics were brutal but clear. Better ones, 260 Japanese aircrewmen dead than American carriers sunk. Better efficient kills than prolonged engagement. Better to exploit a fatal design flaw than give the enemy mercy they wouldn't show in return. He understood the logic. He'd execute it again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until the war ended or he died. Understanding didn't make it feel less like murder. The reports say we're winning, Hayes said, standing to leave. Winning so decisively that Japanese naval aviation is collapsing. They can't replace the losses, can't train crews fast enough, can't produce enough aircraft. He picked up his folder. But every time I watch gun camera footage of a Betty exploding, every time I read casualty estimates, I think about those 260 men who died in the Philippine Sea, flying gas tanks because their country needed them to, burning alive because their designers chose range over protection. He paused at the table's edge. History will call it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a great American victory. And it was. Hayes met Brick's eyes. But those Japanese crews were shooting back. They were trying to kill us right up until the moment they exploded. They just had the profound misfortune of fighting an aircraft that turned them into bomb. Hayes walked away, leaving Brick alone with his cold coffee and tomorrow's certainty. The war would continue. The Bettys would keep coming, and American pilots would keep shooting them down with single bursts into wings filled with unprotected fuel, because that was the job, and the alternative was losing friends to torpedoes those bombers carried. Somewhere over the Pacific, another Betty squadron was probably forming up for a night mission, crews checking their equipment, pilots reviewing approach vectors, gunners loading ammunition they'd likely never have a chance to use effectively. All of them knowing the odds, all of them flying anyway. Brick finished his coffee, stood, and headed for his berth. He had a 500 brief. More Bettys were expected at dawn. The killing would continue until one side or the other had nothing left to send. Thanks for watching WW2 Forgotten 45 channel. If you want more untold stories from World War II, like and subscribe and hit that bell. These heroes deserve to be remembered, and you help us keep their legacy alive. See you in the next one.